Coming. I believe we're going to start the meeting today a little bit out of order with a motion from Dr. Ushkow.
I make a motion with my mouth full that Dr. Bobo or Walt, either one, chair, brings cookies to every meeting.
Second.
Homemade.
I'd just like to make a friendly amendment that given Sarah's description of how the cookies have been made in the past, that these be made by Sarah. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent. We'll look forward to that. Thank you. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes from the
Free
April
motion to
meeting?
provide milk.
Have a motion for approval, please.
So moved.
Second. Thank you.
Just an amendment, I was actually present.
You were actually present?
Yes, I was.
Oh, maybe we can do some minutes to reflect the presence of Dr. Broder.
Opposed.
Thank you. All in favor? Excellent. Thank you very much. We have some correspondence. Oh, I now know what this is. First is a thank you note from the Susquehanna region expressing appreciation for the sharing of our regional protocols. The Northeastern collaboration now also encompasses the Susquehanna region under the same protocols. We'll be inviting them to join a small group to continue protocol review so we can continue to update these and work on them successfully. Cambridge Valley Rescue Squad sent us a note advising they've been approved to operate at the EMTP level by Mountain Lakes, which is particularly important given some of the information that will come from the SEMSCO. Committee reports, starting with Dr. Doynow and the academic committee, please.
Okay. Basically, we met this afternoon. One of the issues was nitro tabs versus nitro spray. And a number of agencies have gone back to nitro tabs because of cost. The spray is very expensive. But what is interesting is apparently the hospitals are not replacing nitro tabs. It's something that probably should happen because it's one of our medications, and it's probably one of the cheapest medications we have. So I would suggest that we send a letter out saying that is one of the medications that should be in the pick list to be replaced by.
I mean, you're going to replace the number of tablets used and put them back in the
No.
bottle with an expiration date?
No, you're going to get a
The
new
whole
bottle.
bottle?
Well, quite frankly, the bottle should probably be open for the patient, and then that should be the end of it.
Yeah.
And it should either stay with the patient or be discarded, not be used multiple times. That would be my suggestion. Or we can replace the spray, which actually St. Peter's is doing, which is interesting. I think we're the only hospital in the region that has spray. Is that correct, Sam? That's
You're
right.
actually not supposed to be replacing any of the nitro.
No.
On the current restocking list, nitro does not appear.
Can we put it on the current restocking list?
Hmm?
Can we put it on the recurring list?
Well, we'd have to take that to the nurses committee to do that.
Okay.
Having them discuss it would be. What's in?
And I say, and then everybody has to agree to make it occur.
Exactly.
It's harder than it sounds.
Well, the nitro spray at $200 a bottle.
Right, so let's
I think
just go
it's
to tabs.
140 or something in hospital purchase price. I don't see that happening.
No, but tabs are,
Tabs are cheap, but frankly, and Mike, if you have something to speak to on this, the difference in efficacy, particularly in our CHFers, is pretty significant. Because those tabs, if you use them in a CHF, just essentially turn to a sublingual bezoar of nitro goo rather than actually being absorbed and being useful.
well, the problem is though that many agencies are now going back to tabs because of the cost. So that may be true, but unless we mandate everybody has to use spray, it is not happening. Since we're giving them the option. So if we're going to be using tabs, then once it's open, that bottle probably should stay with the patient and be replaced. So I think we need to go one way or the other as a group and decide what we want to do, but we should do something.
Would it be all right if we collected some quality improvement data on this over the course of the next couple of months? So we can get a general idea of what the impact would be?
Sure.
And then we bring that back? Because if we just review charts over the next couple of months, we can see how many instances of nitro administration we have over how many patient contacts and then extrapolate that. And it'll start to give us a little bit of data.
And you can just poll the agencies, find out who's using what, but I can tell you a lot of them are now just falling back to the tabs because the cost is so great for a nitro.
Okay. Well, let's just poll our quick 4 or 5 agencies that are represented here today.
Tabs.
Places using tabs.
Tabs.
On all ambulances? I thought it was spray still on the first line. Everything, okay. Brian? Spray, okay. Rotterdam? Spray?
Tabs in Albany County.
Tabs in Albany County?
Gilderland tabs.
Gilderland is tabs?
Stop-back tabs.
Both.
Both?
We carry both.
At the same time? Here's the tablet, wash down some spray.
You're carrying both in each unit, or they just have both and they could have one or the
Nitro,
other?
we have a spray, but our protocol requires for, actually, for the CPAP, we want the tablet because it takes less time to break down the mask and so on and so forth. And it just,
We have both in the box.
Okay. Interesting, okay. So how about if we find out what the picture is across all of the services and we look at charts since the beginning of the year till the next meeting, so we have some data to reflect on, and we can better look at that. The other option that we have that we hadn't come up with an answer to how to do it was intravenous nitro. We actually wrote the protocols so that we could go to that on the idea that what we would use would be the standard formulation nitro, which actually is 1 cc is 100 mics, if I remember correctly. So basically what you do is draw it up in a 1 cc needle or a 1 cc syringe, administer 1 cc of nitro. Instead of giving a 400 mic tablet, you get a 100 micrograms intravenously, which is actually the same bioavailability. But we hadn't come up with a good, safe way of doing that, because obviously we don't want the potential for this just to be hung willy-nilly with its inherent hemodynamic disaster. Any other questions or thoughts on the project that we've now tasked Dean with?
So you're going to bring that back next month, and then we'll bring that back wherever we're going to go.
Exactly.
I love the concept of IV nitro pre-hospitally for the CHFers on BiPAP, because you're trying to open their mouth every 5 minutes after you just got the mask sealed, and then you got to pull it off, and you got to monkey with it for another 5 minutes.
Right.
So really, it's a little time.
I agree. I've seen some really creative solutions by EMS providers to try to put the little WD-40 nozzle, straw into the nitro. The problem is you end up with the WD-40 residue with the nitro. It can't be good. Sam?
Just one comment. If we ask for another medicine to be put on the formulary, or the Pyxis for redistribution, and some of the hospitals are already giving...
Swirling?
No, if some of the hospitals are already apparently restocking this, and it's not on the list of agreed restocking medications, it may bring attention to those hospitals that are currently doing it to say, you know what, we shouldn't be doing this, and pull it back. I just throw it out there as one of the unintended consequences of asking for this to be put on the formulary, so I just mentioned that.
Yes-ish. I think the hospitals themselves and the way they're participating and the way their pharmacies are becoming a part of the process are probably already reviewing that restocking list. So if there's some restocking going on that isn't supposed to be going on, that seems to be dialed back. So hopefully that will be dialed back anyway. And then we'll be able to move forward with everybody on the exact same page so we don't get any potential safe harbors issues, which is what we've really worked hard to conclude. We'll be sending out a letter to all the hospitals and posting it on the website, just highlighting how we have a regional restocking agreement that all of the hospitals have signed on to, because that actually provides compliance, evidence of compliance for each of the hospitals when you get your joint commission review. So it assists in the process for you. That's something that we've been working on with the compliance folks at the Med to make sure we have the right language to put into that letter so it can serve everybody. And I should have that up in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, a few other issues just to bring on. There was a lengthy discussion about internships, and there's going to be a meeting between the directors of the 2 paramedic programs in the area and multiple EMS directors to try and figure out how we're going to keep things going without a problem. There was also a concern about the multiple drug shortages, and should we change our protocols to reflect that so that the medics can do something else, such as, I guess, etomidate is our next drug that's going to be done. So should we change the protocol, or should we just end up, when you're out of a drug, call the doc and decide what to do? leave it up to the group as what they want to do. And the last thing that came up is what constitutes the need to call for a signal. Part of the committee's thoughts were anytime you do any modality, including monitoring, putting a monitor on requires a signal. Other half of the group thought, no, it's only if you do something invasive, such as start an IV or start medical treatment, then you need to call for a signal. Riding in with the monitor on, as long as you did nothing invasive, was not necessarily requiring a signal. So I'll throw that to the group. Everybody thinks.
We actually have that in print.
We did, but we can't.
We
find it.
couldn't find it.
We looked.
I looked through my stuff, Howard looked through his, none of us could put our finger on it.
It was before
We
I
had-
took minutes.
Just to clarify a little bit, what he means is that some of us had different recollections as to what was what and how we were all practicing that. So, some people were putting in for a run number on the Remo system just with a monitored patient. Most of us, I think, are using the invasive skill guideline. So, do an IV, then it's an ALS call. It gets a run number. So.
It's an interesting question. I think the biggest one then comes of what you do with that information. If you monitor the patient on your way in, you consider it an ALS call for billing, and you don't get a signal number for it, then you're not actually calling it an ALS call within the system. I could see that ultimately being a problem in a larger audit if somebody actually looked at the way the system operated.
But for that matter, we bill at the ALS 1 rate just by virtue of a paramedic evaluating the patient and because it was dispatched as a Charlie, regardless of whether the monitor gets put on the patient or not. So, I mean, we can still bill at the ALS rate. It has nothing to do with the regional protocols.
Right. Interesting. I don't know. I would say let's go back, find the advisory. I want to say it was from 08 or 09.
It was a while ago.
It was a while ago, just for clarification. Before we go on the record as saying what it was, we should review what this process has been delineated as in the past, rather than changing what we already have in operation.
And the last was drug shortages as to how do we want to handle it when it comes up. We made some changes or advisories when we've had limited drugs. We want to continue just doing that and then advise medics if there's an immediate concern, they can always call and talk to a doctor.
There currently is a large group of physicians working on a statewide basis on this. Basically, what they're doing is working with staff at the DOH to put together a authorized drug substitution list that would preclude the need to go before the state for approval of protocol changes. I've seen a preliminary draft of this. Some of the things make great sense. Some of them will make very interesting discussion at the CMAC meeting. I won't go through those point by point at this time, but what I would suggest would be for 3 or 4 people, if we find ourselves profoundly short of a drug that we use frequently, should talk about it if it becomes an issue before our next meeting. I would recommend that just Dr. Doyne, myself, anybody else that's interested, just join us for a quick conversation. We come up with an answer that we could employ. In the meantime, etomidate is available, unfortunately, through compounding pharmacies for about $45 a dose with an expiration.
The last one is 72.
72.
We've gotten as quotes as high as 147 for a dose that's good for 6 months. The reason
6
I brought-
months, not 60 days?
6 months was the last one we got.
Oh, that's much better than the
Yeah.
last.
The reason I brought this up at the academic committee meeting is we're already taking measures to, for lack of a better term, ration medications. We don't have enough mag sulfate to put in every ambulance. So therefore, we're in violation of the Remo formulary by not having all of the drugs in a particular ambulance. So I really feel strongly that, the Remac needs to make policy decisions that can help guide us in, appropriately making decisions on basically rationing medications. I mean, I'm sure there isn't an organization in here that hasn't told its paramedics, if the patient doesn't need fentanyl, give them morphine because we can't get fentanyl. But that's not a policy driven by the Remac. We're currently so short on mag sulfate, I don't have it on every ambulance. I don't have an advisory from the Remac telling me it's okay to pull it back and only put it on the ambulances that are actually on the road. So agencies are making decisions that are not driven by the Remac, and I think you guys need to know that. And I think we need to get some advice out from the Remac to agencies on what we're doing. Come June, we're gonna be out of etomidate. So we've got a protocol that says use etomidate. What are we gonna do? I think you guys need to decide that pretty soon. Otherwise, we're not gonna have it. Or we're gonna be forced to pay high ransom rates they haven't made. So I think there needs to be some guidance from this organization as to what we can and cannot do based on your direction.
Part of that will be coming in mid-May, as we look at what these substitutions that are authorized and suggested are. Ketamine certainly becomes an interesting addition for induction of the hypotensive patient. In some cases, we'll have to do it. But I think the idea of allowing agencies to trim their formulary based on needs in primary and secondary ambulances or response vehicles makes a ton of sense.
Sure.
I know we've looked carefully at how we can do that and do it safely. I think not having drugs that you're not going to use on a regular basis on backup ambulances doesn't necessarily make sense, as long as you have the ability to get that drug from somewhere should you need it. So if that's all right with the group, I would certainly put an advisory together that would accomplish that. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Won't even do this motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Okay.
What was that specifically, Dr. Taylor?
It will be specific as soon as I actually figure out the right wording for it. But basically what it will say is, we recognize there are drug shortages, we recognize the need to ration those medications and appropriately put them on units as available. Part of this is a problem that can be accomplished in agency-to-agency conversations. Part of this is a problem that I've asked staff here to work on over the course of the last 6 months so that we don't have any surprise shortages. Etomidate is not a surprise shortage. We recognize that this one was coming and have not found good alternatives other than very expensive ones to take care of. It's nice that now there's a 6-month option instead of just the 60-day options that we looked at first. We've managed to get through the benzo crises okay. We've made our way through the opiate crises reasonably well. We made it through diltiazem when that went down. We got through dextrose. Who the hell knows? Maybe normal saline will be next. We'll all carry water and salt, and we'll have to decide on
The hard part is, I talked to Pfizer today at length with their customer service. They claim they're going to ship etomidate sometime this month, but they won't tell you who they're shipping it to.
Right.
But they claim they're going to ship etomidate this month.
Which frankly becomes a real issue for a municipal agency that is then stuck with whatever purchasing parameters that they're already placed into by the bidding rules. It leaves a lot more flexibility for some of the other agencies that don't have those same restrictions. So it's something that we'll have to follow carefully from a legal perspective, and then other agencies as well. The other thing to keep in mind is we've also done some significant facilitating of basically horse trading of non-controlled substances from one agency to another in order to accomplish good division of medications. One person has too much magnesium, one person doesn't has too much diltiazem. Here's a trade, boom.
Mike,
All right.
per Andy, because that came up on the webinar last week, the Division of Pharmacy under the Health Department is watching that. Because in New York State, you have to be licensed to dispense or sell. Trading falls under the category of dispensing or selling.
That's interesting. The last advice that I had gotten actually from folks at the DOH that shall remain nameless for the telecast here was that as long as they were not controls, exchange of financially similar medications between agencies was fine. So, interesting. I will have to double check that. And if there's
I
advice
got
to
the
that,
same-
I will
From the
give
same
that.
nameless source, they also told me not to do it.
They're working on a policy statement to come out, but it was strongly advised
Okay, good.
not to.
Well, if we have that now from operations at the Bureau of EMS, let's follow that. That's important. It's very important.
All the more reason to underscore your point of working through the Remac. I love the way that you're improvising and overcoming these things. I like the idea of sharing the concepts of how you're doing that, because some agencies may not think about it. So we're sharing information and process, as well as using the physician group to come up with other alternative medical substitutions that you might not think of.
I mean, we've gone as far as taking the etomidate off of all of our units and only carrying it in our special operations unit. I mean, it's getting that bad. We're gonna have to make a decision to spend a lot of money on etomidate short. But if you guys come up with an alternative, then maybe we won't do that. But we have to decide, you know, some guidance from this group medically. Do we need to go out and spend that money on etomidate or not? You tell me.
Well, unfortunately, some of it then falls to Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement and the Bureau of EMS and how they've authorized the use of these medications as well, which is why we have to wait and see where the CMAC falls on this in the mid-month.
One of the things that was
Scott.
mentioned in that webinar was the approval of using the drugs outside of their expiration dates.
Mhm.
And while I don't think the state is ever going to say that you can do it, is that something that would require the CMAC to say that it's okay, or can the regional council say it's okay, or can the individual medical director of the agency say that that's okay?
It's actually interesting. That was a question that came up with Columbia County and the expiring Versed when all of the, on February 1st actually, when all of the Versed in the county expired. And I had a lengthy conversation with BNE about that and said, well, you know, how about if the docs all just say, okay, it's still good? Because let's face it.
We all know that it's.
It was good on January 31st, it's good on February 1st, and it'll be good on the 2nd. But the reality of it is, the only person that can authorize that medication is the manufacturer. The medical direction for the manufacturer is the only one that can say whether or not it is. And we were unable to get any contact
couldn't get
or
anybody to call us
callbacks
back, yeah.
from the manufacturers of the drug, so that drug just ended up getting destroyed. And that's not reasonable. So there is no clear policy that allows us to do that. And frankly, using a control, well, carrying and using a control out of its expiration date, regardless of whether or not your medical director says that it's okay, is a license-losing offense per BNE. There is no room for anything in that. The medical director can't authorize its use, and the provider that uses it is just plain wrong. And there's no, according to BNE, there's no slap on the wrist with it for that one.
That's a controlled substance.
That's a control.
But not-
Now, what about other
Yeah.
drugs that don't fall to BNE? It's a little bit different. The medical director for the manufacturer has to be the one that says it's still okay, not, you know, Dr. Broder or myself or, you know, somebody else.
Sniff it and tell. I'll let you know a trade secret.
Mike, any other advice?
This is a very difficult topic. I mean,
That's why I asked you.
yeah. I mean, it sounds like we're headed in the right direction. I understand the frustration, the glacial movement here and how slow this is proceeding. You know, there's data, I know of data to support beyond use dating for atropine, for 2-PAM. New York City Poison Control has published some papers on that, taking a look at atropine, even atropine from the 1940s, from civil defense kits, to show that it was still, when they ran through HPLC and looked at the drug concentration, it was still provided, you know, something that would work. Same thing with 2-PAM. You know, with the controlled substances, I think you have to, you know, tread very carefully. You know, as you were saying before, don't do it. For things outside that are not controlled, chances are, my opinion would be that it's probably going to, you know, still be a potent medication, but you can't tell. You know, it leaves the, you know, for us maybe to do some research with this, to take a look at some of the medications in terms of the potency beyond the use date, but that's more academic. Practically speaking, I think we're going to have to work the proper channels, and it's going to take some time. You know, I realize the compounding pharmacies are charging what seems like a lot of large price for some of these medications, but most of these pharmacies require, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment to actually be able to produce these things correctly and, you know, in a sterile environment. So.
Gotcha. So, stand by.
Just want
The
to
fact-
bring it to your attention.
Yeah, well, the fact that this group from the CMAC has been working in a vacuum and has not been sharing the processes they have been moving forward has been extremely frustrating to a group of the medical directors. You know, we all look forward to seeing what they're doing in 2 weeks. So, I'll let you know. So, CMAC coming up, SEMSCO coming up. Rich, you want to talk with Remco real quick?
Sure, not a whole lot to report. We had our report from Marvin and Company, our independent accounting firm, and we're still in really good financial shape, which is pretty good for a small non-for-profit. Doc, anything you want to buy, we can afford it. So, anything you want to spend money on. And I think one of the correspondence received is also relevant too. Cambridge Valley was given approval by the REMSCO to operate in the town of Hoosick, which is in the very northeastern corner of Rensselaer County. And pending the absence of an appeal, which I don't think there have been any yet, probably won't be, they will be granted operating territory in the town of Hoosick. Currently a CCT agency going to paramedic, I guess. Good.
Yep.
I can't
Any
do anything
comments,
else.
questions?
Jeff?
Okay, good, thank you. Whole lot of folks upgraded and updated their BLSFR. There are a few that are still being followed up on by staff here who have not, oddly, not completed paperwork that we thought they would have completed, so we're still chasing that stuff. And a couple that have needed some emergent review. As a reminder, if anybody hears about an agency that was BLSFR that has documentation lacking, if they get a letter that says you can no longer operate as a BLSFR because you don't have the right state paperwork in, immediately put them in touch with this office. I am doing emergent PAD authorization for any of these folks. This office has always taken into account the need to have PAD out there and not to have any lapses. All right, so Joe in particular, if you or if Mary hear of an agency that is slipping through the cracks and saying, well, we're going to pull our defibrillators off our trucks, the answer is hell no, put it back on the trucks, check the pads and make sure they're in date. And that the little green X
We've
is
had
on
that
it.
conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Gave me your name too.
It doesn't surprise me for a second.
As I say, the last one we helped facilitate worked out well with Jonathan.
Good.
It was North Bethlehem that was falling through the cracks and we helped.
Okay, perfect. And we just did Waterford Fire just to make sure that they stayed on board too. Okay, nobody for therapeutic hypothermia EPCRs, public access defibrillation, none. New business. Dr. Matt, do you want to talk about the program you were thinking about and training paramedics in the hospital and just a general idea?
Sure. Mike, you talked about trying to find a way to allow our EMTs to get more training, more skills with us in the emergency department. Like mentioned, there's a law that precludes them from doing that, precludes us. One thought was to have the pilot program, the senior refresher program, the lecture base. All of the EMTs are classified as students, so why not have us extend all of the agencies to have the CME program, refresher program, with all of the EMTs as students in that program. When they're in the ED, they become our students, and just like when they're a brand new EMT as a student, we classify them as students and then take them through procedures under direct supervision as a means to not violate any type of state or local regulations. That's something that
Yeah, it does. It sums it up nicely. Basically, we had learned, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, that the Nurse Practice Act prohibited the ability of bringing a paramedic into the hospital to perform advanced skills unless they were enrolled in a educational program. Joe, Mary, what do you think? Can we throw this one at the wall again? When we did 5 or 6 years ago, pointing it up.
Pointing at Mary. That's her expertise.
When we threw this one at the wall and literally wrote up almost the same thing Dr. Mao is describing a few years ago, Mr. Ronsky shot it down very quickly.
I would have to ask, I'm not comfortable commenting on it.
Okay.
I mean, we can present it again, I have no problem assisting with that, but
Can you review it with staff and see whether or not it would be greeted with
yeah, that would be
some
fine.
type of a positive response? Because frankly, the idea is beautiful, and it's something, frankly, that I had gotten hit so hard with the shovel that I didn't think I'd come back with the last time. And it just makes sense. We should be able to train our providers in our emergency departments under our supervision. If somebody can't start IVs, we're not going to teach them on a rubber arm. It'd be much better if we could get someone who's very good at doing it in a hospital to do it.
I mean, some of the
if we
first
can
questions that are going to be
do it.
asked are, if you're a student, typically you're provided liability under the hospital or the college enrollment.
Mhm.
where would the liability come from for this?
Mhm.
And the CME program, you have to recognize is an agency responsibility.
Mhm.
The agency will have to accept ownership of it.
So the agency would have to take responsibility for their participant in the program, which would then be conducted in a hospital, basically.
And they'd have to provide the liability.
Right.
If the agency, and this is, now that the answer on the spot.
No, that's fine.
We'd also
crossing
need
out the
on-site
discussion.
CIC.
If the agency is enrolled as a CME, in the CME course program as we are,
Right.
could we partner with the hospital to provide us with the clinical oversight of need?
I mean, as long as you have a
We
CIC,
would assume
that's- it would have to be a collaboration between the CIC that oversees your program, the agency, and the facility.
I mean, we would certainly assume a liability for our people.
I just don't know, not necessarily in this region, but just north of this region and up by the Canadian border, there's been issues where hospitals don't even want paramedic students in the ER or in the hospital, period. And it's actually all over, it's not just limited to these couple isolated hospitals. I just don't know if by doing this, you're gonna force students out fast.
Mhm.
I mean, Howard, feel free to speak up here. I mean, you've encountered some of the same difficulties. If you have an ER if you have a nursing staff or administrative staff that understands the role of a paramedic in the community and in the EMS system, you're golden. But anytime there's been a change of leadership is typically when it occurs, the value of having students in the facility is questioned.
I think it would be wonderful if it actually were able to
If
work.
it works, I'm 100%.
Under the auspices of physicians. If the physicians were willing to take the paramedic students, I could see it work.
Nursing seems to be.
However, even on top of that, from a state perspective, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my first thought is, who's the CIC that's on site in charge of the education from a state perspective? Because the state doesn't care whether you have a physician at a CME or not. They're still looking for a CIC to sign off on the education that's
And a doctor
taking
number does
place.
not trump a CIC number, right,
I'm completely ignorant of the EMS education system, but correct me if I'm wrong, a CSC doesn't have to be in the hospital during clinical rotation with paramedic student, does it?
They have to be able to sign off and accept responsibility for the training
That's a
that
whole
was
different,
received.
that's a whole different requirement.
That's not
But-
what he's asking, though. Yeah.
But for CMEs, at least as I understood, they do need to. They need to be physically
Yeah, but
present.
the only thing they would have to do is evaluate
Have to
their
be
skills that they
physically
learned in the training program.
Physically
because
approve the
That's all they would
programs.
have to do.
And the liability, I think, is the biggest issue.
So can't you have
That's
the
an
EMS director at each site become a CIC?
It's actually.
Who'd have thought that
That's an easy
question? We got the
no.
biggest trouble.
But you could employ a CIC to work and not be there present at all times, but take ultimate responsibility for.
That-
Absolutely.
Yes and no. The agency has to be willing to accept that CIC signature. The agency in the CME program is the one left holding the bag if there's any issues or questions.
But if the agency's in the CMA program, they must already have a CIC as a prerequisite, isn't it?
No.
They have,
just
there's
have
no
access.
prerequisite, you just have to be able to have a CIC sign off on the core material.
Also understand, for those of you who were there years ago at the Remo CIC update where Mike Taylor came in and, yeah, that was it, so you remember.
Yeah, I do remember that.
He explained to John Politis after he asked if he was a paramedic, that with the CME recertification process, it comes back specifically on the IC who signs off the recert for the individual. So I know I myself would be very tentative in entering any of those agreements right now.
But I think this doesn't necessarily have to be something that was available across the board anyway. I mean, you're talking about agencies that are enrolled in the CME-based recertification program, which all agencies are not participating in anyway. So, you know, we have a CIC on staff. He does all of our Con Ed stuff. He signs off on all of our state paperwork. So maybe Delmar Ambulance doesn't. So be it. That would be up to Delmar. I know that they do, but so I mean, we have a. It seems again that this is one of those things that is just essentially a relationship issue between a CIC who might be on staff or who might not be on staff, but they contract with to provide that service to them.
I could see it that way. I could see an agency who participates contracting with the hospital to provide the educational content
Right,
with
that's
with the CIC oversight.
With
yeah.
the CSU oversight.
I would think then the agency would pick up the liability.
Sure.
would
And I
expect
know
the
we would
agency
pick up the
would.
liability as well, just like Rich said.
You could actually go out, throw it against the wall and see what happens.
It may be off
Pretty
the
much,
top.
what I'm thinking is, you know, Mary, can you throw it against the wall?
Yes,
and
I
then-
have no problem doing that.
Because if there's something, sounds like that stuff is here that could be built. The, you know, liability, big deal, let's figure out who that is.
Right.
Sam?
Just a couple comments. I think if there's any chance that the department's going to be receptive about this, it ought to be presented as a remedial and/or continuing education opportunity, even though it's for already certified medics. Because that's going to be where the rub is. Well, they're not really students.
Right.
But in this context, we're saying they would be students to be able to competently upgrade their skills and hone their skills, et cetera. And just politically, I mean, I think that this is a turf battle that's gone on for a long time from state education because of I guess I'll be candid about it. In my opinion, it's probably due to the fact that nursing doesn't want to extend any other role in an area that is nursing, and they want to protect their turf. Whereas we have models, as all of you know, in other states, New Jersey being one of them, where medics are employed by the hospital on hospital-based rigs, and they work in the ED alongside of nurses, and those nurses love working alongside those medics because some of their skills are better are a lot of times better than what some of the nursing skills are. And they can assist in the ED with everything that they can do out in the field. And of course, in New York, we can't do that, you know, so just a comment. But I think if there's any chance that the department's going to be receptive to this, it's got to be presented in a way that is the training element
Right.
and the education element.
I think building it as a course. This would be a course that would be done through the physicians of the Remac at their hospitals in order to provide continuing training. And I would even leave remediation out of it. I would say a course involving hands-on care in the emergency department.
Mike, if you look at the regulations of the CME program is actually a perpetually ongoing course.
Right.
So the agency's enrolled, the student is enrolled in the course, and the agency is required to maintain the student's course file throughout the entire program. So in a sense, I think the only question you need to ask the state is an individual who's enrolled in the CME recertification-based program a perpetual student or not, period. I don't know if you want to go any more further than that. And if they are a student and they're considered a student in a perpetually ongoing program, then they would get past the legislation.
And they would therefore be students
Yeah.
doing coursework in the hospital with their medical director. and their
Under the
physician.
agency
Yeah.
that enrolled them in a course, and the agency would
Who would
then be responsible for the liability.
But I think it's really important to stay as far away from all of the commentary about paramedics providing skills in hospitals
Absolutely.
Yeah.
as part of
That's
a
why I
job.
mentioned
It would all
what I
be part of
did.
the course.
Because
Thank you,
that's the hot button right there.
Right, right, I agree. Howard?
Would this have any impact on paramedic students in the hospitals? Conflicting
It would
schedules?
if the resources are limited, it would.
Well, I think we just have to make sure that it didn't. I think we would have to make sure that it did not impact that. I think that's really important.
I think in those cases I've seen where you have a student and someone who's got in for retraining or remediation or a continuing education, that the person who has more experience enjoys taking the new student and giving that person the opportunity of working together. Both sides actually learn from that as well. So I think that even though there's limited resources, by having two of those individuals together with one of our physicians teaching them, both sides win, everyone wins, one helps the other one. And so I think that really won't be so much of an issue. There's a lot of camaraderie among the members of the EMTs. So I think that would work out fine. And the smaller hospitals, there is some resistance. I've seen in some EDs where the ED takes ownership and says, we're the physician, we're in charge of these medics anyway. Well, they're gonna fall to us, not nursing staff. And then once the nursing department hears it, they're like, okay, great, it's not their problem, and then the physicians take ownership of it. And that helps get around it. And Sam mentioned, is not to hold them as the, to be careful about our wording.
Absolutely.
I take students from Cobblestone and they spend 4 hours just with me. Once the nurses know that they're rotating with me and they have nothing to do with them, that's fine. I mean, they're hanging out with me and they're not responsible, or they're happy to let me do whatever I want to do. So, I mean, that's worked out pretty well from that standpoint. I don't think they're going to get a lot of resistance as long as we're not saying, okay, here are more people you guys have to do
Right.
here.
And out applications.
I think it's true. Okay. Anybody else?
Would the premise be essentially for remediation or quote-unquote continuing education? And would we expect that training to stay within the boundaries of our current skill set and or protocols? Or would we be able to do things outside of those protocols under the direct supervision of the physician? Because if we were able to do that, that may be a good place for us to sort of pilot some things that we're considering putting into the protocol.
Really want to rock the boat.
No, I'm just saying, I don't.
Let's make sure that
Thoracentesis, here we
don't
come.
move this to
No,
intro to
no,
thoracotomy or,
Right.
No.
That's why I'm asking
And
for
I think it's a
that.
great question, because I
Good news,
think we need to
intermediates
look
can
at
now
this
crack
as
chests.
just continuing education. If a continuation program ends up being used for remediation, that's a reasonable use of an educational program. I would not build it as a remediation program, and I would certainly not build it as something that's going to expand the scope.
That's the question.
I think we start looking at it as expanding the scope, then we're starting to tread on very mobile ground.
I think you're
It's totally
solidifying
different.
already taught skills. I mean, I think that's,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, how often does a medic get, you know, they're lucky and, busy service, you're getting maybe 2 or 3 patients a shift on a monitor versus the 20 patients that are in the ER that are all on monitors, that they like go out, go off and look at those different patients. It's just
Right.
building the skill set, and building the exposure.
I think this is a great idea, I really do. Just keep in mind that we have 700 paramedics in this region.
Not everyone is going to participate. For that matter, not every person that we have working for us participates in the CME-based recertification program. So not every agency does, and then even within those agencies that do, not every paramedic does. I just like to say, I also think it's an outstanding idea for what it's worth. I mean, I know I can't speak for all the paramedics out there, but I think it's a great idea. I know seeing an EKG, for example, now versus seeing it when I was a student is completely different. I know way more now than I knew when I was in school. I've seen more myself since then, so seeing a complicated, left axis deviation, blah, 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 and seeing it now and being able to discuss it with you is way different than it would have been 15 years ago. So, I think it could be an invaluable tool.
We may have to, if not every paramedic is going to be involved, maybe have some ID that in the heat of the moment, someone can look up and say, I am part of the plan, I can do this, versus those paramedics whose agencies will not support that, be able to say, oh, I'm not part of it, it's okay. Because many of us do not know every single person's agency that recognizes them as a paramedic. So we may have a separate ID and say, okay, it's okay, I'm part of the program.
Let's throw it at the wall first, see if it sticks, and once we do that, then we'll figure out how to paint it. Okay, good. Mary, thanks. Let's work on that together and see if we can really because I think it's a great idea.
Dr.
So,
Taylor, report to academic next meeting or report to MAC?
report to academic. Yeah. Medication shortage update. I think we've beaten that one into the ground already. And we will continue to beat that soundly every time that we get together for the next 5 years. Mike? Sure, 5 years. Couple of other updates. The intranasal naloxone program is closer to taking off on a not quite statewide basis, but on a multi-regional basis. Have we received the training discs yet? No. Okay. They are in the process of being produced by the Department of Health and will hopefully arrive at some point. Dr. Vogel?
I just wanted to relay a concern that was brought to me by some staff at our hospital about that program. They're concerned about what happens when you've got a basic EMT in the back of a rig with a patient that they've now awakened from a narcotic-induced stupor, and said patient is somewhat angry. They have nothing in their repertoire to give this patient to settle them back down, and they're worried about safety issues.
That was actually something we looked at a lot before we built the program itself, in particular looking at the data that's come from Boston, where basic life support EMTs have been doing intranasal naloxone for the last, get my dates wrong, I think 7 years. I think they started it in about 2004 or 5. During that period of time, when I talked to Sophie Dyer, who's their medical director, about 2 years ago, before we started building this at the DOH, making sure that it was safe to go into, they had achieved somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 reversals of apneic patients with opioid overdoses with no assaults on any of their personnel. And it was that safety element that was the most important component for me. I wouldn't want to start anything that has the potential to harm. And one of the things that we're doing in the quality improvement end of the program is reviewing every single utilization of naloxone to make sure that there aren't any. If there are issues of safety, we'll look at each one individually and see what happened. The safety of the personnel for the person who either is just very angry that they no longer are high, or has an unopposed sympathomimetic now on board, are two things that are of profound concern. We're going to be watching really carefully. That has not been demonstrated to be an issue in any of the other programs that I've talked to, particularly the Boston program where they have the most data.
What's the dose, Mike, of the typical?
It's a milligram in
intranasal?
each nostril.
1 milligram?
1 milligram in each nostril. And you're probably the bioavailability is somewhere between, it's a dose of 2 milligrams, and the bioavailability is probably somewhere a milligram or less by the time you get the spray dispersed into the nares, a whole bunch just washing away. You're giving an ml on each side. That's a pretty large dose to give intranasally. So you're probably getting a half an ml to a little bit more that may actually end up being effectively absorbed. But they'll have 2 packages there, so they can give 2 doses if they need to for these patients.
What's the requirement for agencies that want to participate in this, or did you handpick agencies? How did that?
BLS agencies without easy ALS backup. So there actually are remarkably few in this area. And there are a lot more in Mountain Lakes, Arams, Suffolk County, and out in Rochester, where Rochester Fire will be our biggest data set.
So agencies such as ours that, even though we carry EpiPens and all the other EMT advanced stuff, whatever you want to call it,
right,
would not be doing
this? You certainly could, but it would probably be something that wouldn't make any sense because the chance of using it would be unbelievably low. So it'd probably be better off to leave the resources to others that would be more likely to use it. If you happen to have a
Can
little...
we do the same thing with EpiPens then?
No. This is a pilot project. That's part 800. Sorry. Any other questions about that? Okay. CPR in the schools. Just so you guys know, the push is on once again to try to get CPR to be mandated for education in high schools. I went and spent some time at the Legislative Office building, knocking on doors and smiling at people and teaching Senator Skelos how to do CPR this morning. There may very well come a time where the Senate is going to ask us to come in and teach all of the senators CPR. If so, I will put an email out and ask for any volunteers from this group, because I think it would be an interesting opportunity for us to gain some legislative exposure and teach a group of people who very much need CPR training. Scott.
The chair of the Education Committee in the Senate is Stephen Saland, who is our senator over there.
Extremely nice guy, yeah.
Except that he doesn't support this legislation at all. So we had sent him a letter requesting, asking for him to support this, and he sent me a letter back stating that he was unable to support it in its current form because he felt like it placed another unfunded mandate on the school districts. I sent him another letter back explaining why we disagree. Good. And hoping that he would reconsider. But for what it's worth, that seems to be one of the hang-ups, is the idea of an unfunded mandate. I know Mike and I talked about it a little bit just in the Ichabod Crane School District. You know, a 1-hour session in a PE class taught by, I mean, they're teaching hands only, not really doing much else, doesn't really seem like a great deal of money. So, you know, we kind of felt like it's not really so financially burdensome that it should be an issue, and that maybe he had some misconceptions about that. So whoever's pushing this from a lobbying standpoint may want to know that information. So I'm not sure
Thank you.
if you're in
No, they've certainly,
contact with those
they've
people.
certainly seen that, and that was some of the stuff that we talked to Senator Skelos this morning about, and Senator McDonald as well. The unfunded mandate is a huge problem, certainly in the emergency departments. We have seen unfunded mandates, particularly when some of those mandates have been tacked onto legislation that we very much wanted and needed. It's almost unfair, certainly mean. But unfunded mandates are real, and they are a potential problem. This one is the cost-benefit analysis. Really, you know, where does it fall? And that's something that each senator will have to dig deep and think about. Senator Saland, by the way, was a huge advocate of the source patient testing move that we had, and ultimately we passed. However, we did get an unfunded mandate as part of the source patient testing, which was, I had some choice words for. So it will continue to percolate along. It may stall one more time. It looks like the Senate is more likely to act favorably upon this than
Is it
the
gonna be out of
Assembly,
committee?
because it has not gotten any movement whatsoever in the Assembly, but has actually moved out of finance in the Senate. So we'll see where it goes from here.
Does it have to come through education?
It will have to touch on education. I'm not sure which pieces of it. If
Because if
other,
it comes from his committee, I dare say, without his approval, it's not coming out of his committee. So.
it'll be interesting to see where these things fall
Yeah.
as people, as they caucus a little bit on it. Certainly, there will be a lot of conversation between Senate Republicans about this.
Right.
So we'll see where it goes. Other thoughts or comments? Okay. Anything else from the floor? Peter?
Over at Remac, I've been working with a group of surgeons and emergency department staff, both nursing and faculty in the department, to work on the trauma resuscitations that are coming in. Specifically, my role has been to work to facilitate EMS receiving into the emergency department of those patients. And I know that as a EMS provider and also medical director, that it does not go smoothly most of the time. And I'm working to improve that, sort of initial sort of transition of care between our EMS folks and our emergency department staff. To that end, there's a committee of about a dozen folks that are meeting every 2-week basis, and a bunch of ideas have been propagated along the way. And so at EMS Week, when we have our first, when I have the opportunity, I'm going to present a bunch of ideas to the staff about, to our EMS providers, just, and I want to give you the heads up. And it's not anything earth-shattering. It's, here's how we're doing trauma activations. We're going to a leveled response where, sort of our end, where, what's going to be at level 1, the guys who are shot in the box, the really critically ill patients versus our stable trauma patients. And the idea here is it doesn't change anything for EMS providers, but what I'm going to try to push is the biggest thing that our folks at the receiving hospital is, and myself included, is trying to get a concise report from EMS staff. And sometimes it's awesome. Sometimes, everybody knows this. Sometimes you get a great report from our providers, but other times, especially with critically ill patients, I got the driver calling up and saying, listen, I got, super sick patient in the back coming in 5, and that's all I get. And so what we're going to try to propagate and out to this, and the reason I put this out there is I want any kind of feedback that I can do to further this cause along. We're going to be talking about, 5 things I need to know 5 minutes out before people arrive. And talking about a level of response, because I need to, and because, our EMS providers are giving this. And so what I'm pointing out to you guys is, along the way, please find me, and I'm happy to pass out my email and all that such. Anything that I can do to kind of make the transition of care, specifically with these trauma patients, but obviously, it opens up to other realms as well. We actually, Dr. Daly and I met a few weeks ago, and we are trying to work on the idea of a sort of EMS liaison type of person. And this is still a ways away, but that can facilitate the transfer of care. And so I think that you can see that coming in, and it's being utilized around the country and all other places so that we can get better care, and better communication between our staff. So that's coming along, and there'll be more details coming out in the EMS week and then beyond that. Thank you.
Rob, do you want to talk about your upcoming Albatross?
Yeah, so I have the pleasure of having, unfortunately, not as much control as I would like over Camp Bisco, medical director for Duanesburg. Unfortunately, it looks like Bisco has hired the Duanesburg officers to set up their program, but now they have a little conflict of interest. So the response that they've planned for this year, those who don't know, Camp Bisco is the 15 to 20,000 person year Tox Fest in July.
I believe they call it a music fest, not a Tox Fest.
Music is a sidebar. So the current plan for this, last year their plan was an ambulance on site. That kind of got overwhelmed. They had about 30 calls in 3 days. Or about more than half were truly ALS, and about half of them were actively seizing. One ended up in the ICU, and a whole bunch ended up obs for the entire shift until they were awake or oriented and walked out. But the current plan that was proposed was a BLS for 24 hours, a second BLS for 12 hours between 3 and 3, and then 2 off-site ALS. The problem is they didn't want to talk to the people that they should, Mohawk, and then they went elsewhere. And I'm getting different stories between Duanesburg's people and the DOH as far as what they're actually allowed to do. Big problem is Rochester, Rotterdam, sorry. Their next closest ALS is, actually their closest ALS is police-based, and the owner doesn't want them on site. So now you have the situation we had last year where they had 8 people in the back of an ambulance trying to hold someone down to get them to ALS. Multiple proposals sent out to everyone involved, and they are reworking the plan. Supposedly, along my recommendation was at least 2 ambulances, ALS level. I don't care if they want to do a BLS with a medic fly car, how they want to do it with an ALS ambulance. 24 hours plus a third for the busier times. We would love to have the promoter put a dock on site, but since the Department of Health has already released their permit, they have the nuclear option of rescinding it, but it doesn't look like anyone is stepping up to actually take control over everything. So the best we can do is have them voluntarily increase their EMS staffing.
Joe? They have, there's one final step that they have, hurdle that they haven't gone over yet. They're probably not telling you. The county hasn't issued the permit yet. The county's the one that actually issues the permit. We issued a Part 18. The actual county permit to hold the event hasn't been issued yet. I spoke with the county health department director yesterday, and he's going to reach out to the right people and see if he can facilitate prior to the 16th meeting an agreement to fix the issue. So where it stands at this point, it's still up in the air.
There's just a large potential for a disaster.
Oh, absolutely.
The amount of drugs they have at one hot day, and it's going to be a real mess.
Absolutely. There's no
There's
question
nothing
about
in
it.
the plan for any of that. And this care on site is 10 to 20 EMTs. Nothing else.
What are the dates?
12th through the 15th of July.
You're on vacation, right?
I am.
How's that pilot Narcan thing going?
I would say Narcan is going to be the least of their problems. This is more of an
No,
occurrence that
we're
has
actually
been
talking
not
to
a lot
the
of
pharmacy.
opioids.
They're
Not an opiate.
stocked on benzos for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think last year
Barrel
they
of
did
benzos.
be several.
Nasal Romazicon?
No. No Romazicon, bad word. Bad word. Rich.
If I can direct the question to Joe. Joe, if you can answer only, in their Part 18 application, is there any mention of advanced life support service, and from where might they be obtaining it?
Well, there's only one place they can obtain it.
Well, they haven't talked to me, that's why I'm wondering.
The person coordinating
But they
that
can't,
particular
but-
aspect of it knows very well what he has to do.
And the reason for
Really-
not going to Mohawk was that they work within their budget. It's a multi-million-dollar for-profit adventure. I don't think anyone here cares about their budget.
I certainly don't, no.
And
Yeah.
neither does the director of the health, the
Exactly.
local health department. He said, excuse me, it sucks to be them, but they have to have it. So I have a feeling this may resolve itself on the 15th or the 16th.
Excellent.
Actually, there was a meeting on the 16th for the EMS involved at joint firm.
Keep us posted. We will all be excited to find out what happens next.
Just for the sake of the record, they have made, this particular promoter, this event organizer, has made no arrangement with Mohawk as of this date for advanced life support services at camp, at school whatsoever. So as far as we know, there is no ALS being provided there.
And you are the sole CON
We are the
holder.
sole licensed CON provider, or holder for that area.
The dealings have been made with Rotterdam, Rotterdam, I said it right this time. But that wouldn't be on site because they're police-based. And then they were talking with GAVAC, who has no authority to be there. So and it all comes down to that the people who are setting up now have a conflict of interest between the town of Williamsburg, and they're making money off of this going now.
Right.
And Rotterdam would just be mutual aid.
Well, that's.
No, they wouldn't be mutual aid.
They would be posted there, but they would have, according to DOH, if you have, for something this size, you need to have a doc or an ALS on site. Rotterdam can't go on site because of the space they aren't allowed to be by the
The owner of the grounds will not allow any law enforcement within the property confines.
Because everyone.
I'm going. What kind of music is this? I think I'm in.
Actually, if you go on their website, you will be, I thought I was
Disco,
shocked.
disco.
that
Don't
you
even
would-
say it.
I won't say it on the record, no, you'll be shocked by the name of some of their bands that are playing.
Nice.
Yeah.
BIS.
Or at least you were shocked.
I was shocked, yes. Yeah.
Actually, if you want any of the cards advertising it, they're available in most of the rest stops across I-90.
And if you lick them, what happens?
You won't remember. That's a great question.
Scott?
You go on a further trip than what you were
Those were stamps.
So one other thing, a drug error that was caught as a near miss. And I'll show the picture to everybody. I'll pass it around. Basically, one of the providers at Albany Fire was checking their gear and looked carefully at their magnesium and discovered that actually it wasn't magnesium, it was manganese. We think we have tracked down where this came from. We believe it was an error that was created actually through dispensing in our pharmacy. We think we have already created engineering controls to prevent this from happening again because it was a near miss, did not affect patient care, and we at the same time think we have backtracked through all the potential places that any additional can go. We have a par of 2, so our Pyxis is stocked with 2 magnesiums at any one point, and we believe we have both of those manganese that may have been placed in there back in our hands. At the same time, though, the other thing that's a possibility is this manganese didn't actually originate at Albany Med, that it may actually have been dumped into our Pyxis by somebody restocking, because we still have a problem with people replacing medications in our Pyxis when their medications have expired. So in the off chance that this actually started somewhere else, please everybody go home and look and make sure that the magnesium you have indeed has the G before the N. Because frankly, when I looked at these vials, you look at them quick, you're going to give the wrong drug. Manganese doesn't have any bad effects if you push this. On the other hand, you sure as hell ain't going to change that torsades into anything other than continued torsades, and it's not going to do a whole lot for preterm labor. So,
What medicinal use does it have?
I have no idea.
It goes into TPN.
Yeah, TPN. I'm surprised.
so how it, and that was one of the engineering controls that already existed, is the fact that it only is in the TPN section of the pharmacy.
Right.
So we have no idea how it came out. There's no
Are they
pathway
able
to
track
figure it out.
via the lot number, or no?
I don't know what else they have done with that. I'll actually check. That's a great idea. That's a really good idea. But I'll pass along the picture of the two vials, so you can see what they look like. They're, it's dramatic, and frankly, we're issuing a commendation to the paramedic that picked it up, because they're the exact same size vials, even though the color of the cap is different. You know something? The cap colors change on stuff like the wind. So, just pass that along. It was a near miss, I just wanted to share because of that. And great move by a paramedic, and I think we've gone back to track all of the pieces that we needed to. What?
Who caught it?
Doesn't matter. Not necessary for the record, but it was good. Very, very good job by him.
We text on your phone, is it?
What?
We're gonna update your Facebook status.
I would just like to point out, I do not Facebook.
You will by the time he gets around the room.
Sam.
Mike, you go there?
Daley did what?
Just a quick announcement, Mike. St. Peter's is having our annual EMS get-together on Monday night next week. We're doing a little early from EMS week just because there's so many other activities going on the rest of the month. And I think we have a 1 hour CME available with that, and dinner is being served 6 p.m. in, I think, the Mercy Conference Room's on the first floor, which I think is this, May? Is the Mercy Conference? I can't remember, but we've been e-blasting stuff out there, so it's been in the paper as well.
And the food is
Not a
always
clue.
awesome.
Yeah, food will be very good as usual.
Surf and turf.
No, it's Italian.
Probably Italian,
really good
but I don't
Italian.
know.
Really good.
I didn't personally arrange it. The communications department's done a good job.
Say with 100%
Menu
certainty that
before.
I've never heard of any of these.
So Monday night, if anybody's available, please come.
Zed's dead.
Wednesday night, 1 week from today, stroke lecture over at the Krause Center. There will be food. Can't guarantee it's quality, but I'll bring the cookies.
It is quality.
You must be the rent to CIC.
Oh, good. What time is it?
Dinner's at 6:30.
Okay.
And Albany Med's having their annual EMS night event. I would tell you what date it is, but I'd have to check my phone, which is currently over there. It's the 16th, there you go.
Ellis is the 22nd.
And Ellis is the 22nd.
Like making the whole.
So you should be able to go for a couple of
Everybody
weeks.
can eat well. Everybody can eat well.
All right. Motion to adjourn? Thank you all.
Mike.